Hello everyone, welcome back to the Highland Greenhouse here at Carlton Carnivores. I've got another plant spotlight for you guys, and today is a species that is relatively widespread in the wild, but for some reason is not really commonly seen in cultivation. Might be due to its similarity to some of its relatives, at least in terms of picture shape and color, but it's a species that I think is definitely worth growing for its own right because it is quite attractive, and that is Nepenthes mindanaoensis. Now, this plant here actually has kind of a tumultuous history personally because I received it as a seedling of supposedly Nepenthes surigauensis, which is actually a Morelliana relative with really fat, tubby pitchers, and it is quite obviously not that. It is very distinctly an alata relative instead. This species is found on Dinagat and Mindanao Islands in the Philippines, and it's pretty widespread in the northern portion of Mindanao, possibly in the southern portion as well, but political conflicts, unfortunately, are making study in the southern portions very difficult. It is quite widespread in elevation as well, ranging from sea level to, in some cases, such as on Mount Hamiguitan, up to 1,400 meters in elevation, so almost 5,000 feet. And it grows in a wide variety of habitats, always terrestrially. It's not really an epiphyte in any manner, but it likes to grow in fairly open spaces, so ridge tops, clearings, meadows, and such. Any place that has very open vegetation and allows the sunlight to get right down to the soil surface, basically. This species does grow up to 6 meters plus, so over 25 feet in length. When it's fully mature, a long scrambling stem that it produces that will climb up into the trees nearby and such. It has a very strong, sturdy, cylindrical stem and leaves that come down and clasp about half to 3/4 of the way around that stem. They don't extend down the stem at all. They don't go all the way around, just most of the way around before ending. They go up to a very, very distinctly petiolate section of the leaf, and that is a very distinctive trait of this species. It's similar to copelandii, in which sometimes that petiole can get really, really long as well, and it's almost tubular because the sides overlap on each other. Out to usually what is an elliptic or kind of sublanceolate leaf shape, so very elongate, broadest kind of near the middle, and then tapers towards both ends. It is usually not quite as tapered near this end, actually. Kind of comes down to a slightly obtuse, maybe very narrowly acute tip, oftentimes where it is almost subpeltate. The leaf actually ends just above the connection to the tendril. It's very slight. It's not peltate as in like raja or peltata, but it does sometimes look like the tendril is dropping off underneath the leaf itself rather than out the end of the leaf. The lower pitchers are relatively infrequently produced, mainly by young plants only, and they tend to grow up to about 6 inches tall. So this pitcher is almost as big as the lowers will get. It will get a little bit taller than this. It's about 4.5, 5 inches. So they can get a little bit taller than this. They have an ovate to maybe almost slightly globose lower third generally, coming up to a very slight but distinct hip where it narrows, and then the upper portion of the lower pitchers is generally roughly cylindrical all the way up to that teardrop shaped mouth that is very distinctly slanting upward. They do have a pair of fringed wings that runs up the front of the pitcher. Those wings may be kind of absent in the bottom quarter of the pitcher or so, but they're usually very distinct on the upper portion of the pitcher. And then the peristome is relatively simple in structure, maybe slightly flared up along the neck or out to the sides of the mouth here, but it's otherwise very simple, rounded, and unadorned. The lid is narrow and roughly ovular in shape as well. Now, the coloration on this species can be relatively similar to other blotchy species in its group, but it generally tends to be kind of greenish in the background with very light to sometimes very heavily mottled patterning of reds to even dark purple to black. The peristome also is often quite flashy. It can be relatively simple like this one, slightly blushed or striped with red on a cream background, or it may be heavily striped or even solid red, purple, or black. Upper pitchers are quite similar to the lowers, but they get quite a bit larger, up to 9 inches, almost 10 inches tall, in fact, maybe even a little more. And they tend to see that inflated section in the bottom become a little more restricted, but a lot more distinctive, much more flared and globose, to a narrowing to a very, very distinctive hip. Before the upper portion, the next 3/4 or 4/5 of that pitcher being very distinctly cylindrical or funnel shaped. Those upper pitchers also oftentimes retain the wings, although they may sometimes disappear as well. It's variable in this species. And the peristome actually becomes a little bit wider and more flared out around the mouth in the uppers. Lid will remain the same shape. The coloration on those uppers also tends to match that of the lowers, although they may often be even more heavily patterned. So the upper pitchers are actually quite a bit more attractive even than the lower pitchers are, even as pretty as the lowers can be sometimes. Now, those upper pitchers, of course, are what this plant primarily produces. It doesn't take long for the species to start vining and producing them, and it will continue to produce those all the way throughout its lifespan. And even new basils oftentimes only will produce a couple of lower pitchers before they transition to the standard uppers. Now, because they retain the wings and such, that really globose lower section, and the fact that the tendril attaches not off to the side or the front of the pitcher, but usually curving out the back of the pitcher, is how it's kind of distinguished from the lower pitchers most easily. Now, this species, like all Nepenthes, is dioecious, so once it's fully grown, they will experience slight seasons in the Philippines. So the wet season may bring about the trigger that this species needs to start blooming. And as things start to dry out, that's when it's sending out flower stalks, attracting insects, and hopefully spreading the seeds just before the next wet season comes in so that they sprout well. But you do need a male and a female plant flowering at the same time in the wild, or in cultivation you at least need a female plant and then pollen from somewhere, either a plant that has flowered previously at the same time or somebody else has one in bloom. It will take several months for them to form those seeds, and like most Nepenthes, they are small little wood splinter looking things that are very easily blown about by wind and water. And those will take, again, several months oftentimes to sprout and grow. Like all Nepenthes, these guys take a while to grow from seed to maturity. You can expect 3 to 5 years minimum usually for them to grow from a little seedling all the way to a full-size plant, making uppers and ready to flower. Now, in cultivation, again, this species for some reason doesn't seem to be very common, especially not as common as its relatives like graciliflora or even alata, which is a relatively uncommon plant still in cultivation. But it is perhaps gaining a little more popularity recently, and where you do find it, it's relatively inexpensive. And because, of course, it is fairly widespread in the wild, and easy to grow in cultivation, usually we don't have to worry about it being poached, and plants that are in the wild are relatively secure populations at least. But it's always a good idea to double check your sources for these plants, make sure it is from a reputable source that is producing them in cultivation through cuttings or tissue culture or producing their own seeds, just so that we don't have any impacts on the wild populations. But this is a species you can probably stick into just about any environmental conditions, and it will probably do just fine. Most of their populations are below 800 meters, so below about 2,400 feet in elevation. So they are quite tolerant of lowland conditions generally, but because they have populations that will also go up to 1,400 meters or so, they are also tolerant of highland conditions as well, which is why I've got this guy in the slightly more available for room highland greenhouse here. So they are quite tolerant of a wide range of temperatures, whether it's getting up to 90 degrees Fahrenheit plus during the day and only down in the 70s at night, or if you've got a cool setup where it's in the 70s to 80s during the day and maybe dropping down in the 50s at night. These guys will be just happy in either case. Biggest thing is, of course, like most Nepenthes, they want a nice moist but aerated soil, so a 1-to-1 sphagnum perlite or sphagnum perlite, throw in cocoa chips or pumice or something else to loosen it up so that it's retaining moisture but has air flow through it so that it doesn't form anaerobic conditions and risk the plant. That's what these guys are looking for. They will probably appreciate a slightly higher humidity than most, but they're probably also going to be fairly adaptable to household conditions. And you will want to give them a lot of light. Again, these are open clearing plants. They like full sunlight, basically. Now, a plant that's in cultivation might not be acclimated to full sun and may sunburn fairly easily if it's just stuck out there. But if you acclimate it slowly to full sun conditions, or simply the brightest artificial light you can provide them, that's what they'll be the happiest with. Now, again, if you're able to find this plant, it's not the most common in cultivation still. It's not really sought after because it's fairly similar to a lot of its relatives, but it's still kind of worth paying attention to and growing if you can get a hold of it. You're probably going to find plants that are on average between 30 and 50 bucks a piece, even for a plant of this size. So not the most expensive species at all, and fairly affordable for your average person. But if you can find it, I would certainly suggest picking one up if you have the space, because it is a pretty distinctive and interesting species to work with. Now, that is about all that I have for this species. Certainly, if there's anything I've missed, any questions you have, leave them in the comments below. Give a like to the video if you enjoyed it. Share it with somebody else if you know somebody who wants to learn about this species. And make sure to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss anything coming up, and you can help support me as well in doing that. If you'd like to learn more about the plants and animals that I work with here at Carlton Carnivores, you can find my website, carltoncarnivores.com, where the blog and database are, or follow me on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, etc. at Carlton Carnivores. If you'd like to help support production of these videos, because it is time consuming to film these and expensive to raise these plants, you can consider buying some of the plants or merchandise at my website shop, or become a Patreon member where you get early access to the videos and access to the exclusive monthly seed contests that I do for members there as well. You can also, if you don't want to do a monthly subscription like that, you can make one-time donations at coffee.com or simply contact me for other methods. Most of the links for these things will be in the video description below, but until next time, I'm Hawken Carlton, and this is Carlton Carnivores.